We knew that she was going to be in Texas. So I said, open invitation.
Right. You said you can come whenever you want.
Anytime. You pick a time, I will be here.
Democrats need to wisen up to the fact that it's a brand new era in political campaigning, and the old rules no longer apply. The old ways of campaigning and getting your message out aren't really as effective. And so when we're thinking about candidates, we have to consider whether they're comfortable making a case for themselves in a less formal format. And Joe Rogan's podcast is a good example.
Recently on his podcast, Joe Rogan dropped what can only be described as a political grenade, revealing that Kamala Harris straight up refused an invitation to appear on his show during the 2024 election season. And this wasn't just some casual no thanks. This was a calculated dodge that spoke volumes about her campaign's fear of unfiltered conversation. The revelation sent shockwaves through the political commentary world, especially with Kasparian jumping in and delivering a scorching critique. Kasparian didn't hold back, ripping into the way this decision perfectly exposes Harris's obsession with control, her fear of unpredictability, and her lack of authenticity. Today, we're digging into Rogan's blunt call-out, Kasparian's blistering response, and what this entire mess says about the outdated, broken playbook still being used in modern American politics.
We knew that she was going to be in Texas. So I said, open invitation.
Right. You said you can come whenever you want.
Anytime. You pick a time, I will be here.
According to Joe Rogan, the topic of marijuana was an absolute no-go for the Harris campaign. He says it was one of the topics they told him was off limits to come on his podcast. But why? Well, during the election cycle, it wasn't until the end of September that Kamala Harris came out in support of legalizing marijuana on a federal level. And as Rogan said, she may have been hesitant to talk about it because of her prosecutorial record. And this was something that progressives were actually very critical about when it came to Kamala Harris during the Democratic primary in 2020.
Let's rewind to the 2020 Democratic primary, when Kamala Harris's decision to sidestep Joe Rogan's podcast wasn't just a PR blunder. It was a full-on political own goal. Rogan's show is one of the most powerful platforms in the world, reaching millions of listeners who crave honest, unscripted conversation. But instead of taking that chance, Harris's team reportedly walked in with a laundry list of demands, tightly scripted talking points, a 1-hour time limit, and full editing control. That's not confidence. That's damage control in disguise. The elephant in the room. Marijuana legalization. A topic Harris desperately needed to address given her highly criticized prosecutorial record, where she oversaw thousands of marijuana-related convictions. This was her shot to acknowledge the controversy, admit mistakes, and show real growth. Instead, she ducked it. Imagine the headlines if she had simply said, "Yes, I got it wrong. Here's how I've changed." It would have been a political power move. Instead, she left the impression of a politician more interested in protecting her image than having an honest conversation.
So as San Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011, Harris oversaw over 1,900 convictions for cannabis violations. There's a cannabis violation in my household on the reg. Like, it's just unbelievable to think about how many people had been thrown in prison over this, over pot. But let me continue with that graphic. Still, only a small number of those people actually ended up in prison, and that's important to keep in mind as well. Also, usually there's like a plea deal, so if someone was thrown in prison for what appeared to just be simple marijuana possession, typically they pled a more serious offense down to simple possession. But nonetheless, we all know that people have been thrown in prison in the past for marijuana possession and marijuana-related crimes, and she was one of the prosecutors who carried, those convictions out. Then fast forward to 2018, when she co-sponsored legislation with Senator Cory Booker to legalize marijuana federally. So maybe she didn't want to talk about like her evolution. Maybe she didn't want to explain where that evolution came from, but she did talk about marijuana on another podcast appearance. Here's what she said on the All the Smoke podcast. So I'm curious what you think, John, because for me, this issue is such a layup, and I don't know why someone like Kamala Harris can't just say, look, this is where the country used to be, and I regret that was the case. I have grown. I have evolved as a person. I've made mistakes. Here's where I stand on the issue now. I think that it's admirable when people take ownership of, misguided decisions or actions they've taken in the past. But I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's why I find it very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm inclined in this case to just take him at his interpretation of what the conversation was, but it's so confusing that it's hard to understand. So she turned down a couple weeks before the election an opportunity to come on, partly at least, because she didn't want to talk about an issue that she has the right position on now. I don't understand that at all. It would be so incredibly easy to say, it was my job at that point to uphold the law, and that's what I did. It's also my personal prerogative to seek to change it, which is what I will do. I will legalize it. What I did when it was my job was, yes, I put people in jail. I didn't personally like that, but that was the law. I would say there are other people that want to do far more than just uphold the law. Donald Trump repeatedly talks about giving the death penalty to people who deal drugs, which is significantly worse than putting them in jail. Why would that be so difficult for her to say? And theoretically, maybe you could win Joe Rogan over because he doesn't seem to be aware of Donald Trump's history of making comments about killing people for dealing drugs. He certainly didn't bring it up when he had Donald Trump on. I feel like that was a very manageable situation.
I agree. I totally agree with you on that. Democrats need to wisen up to the fact that it's a brand new era in political campaigning. And the old rules no longer apply. The old ways of campaigning and getting your message out aren't really as effective.
Kamala Harris has somehow managed to unite progressives and conservatives in their criticism of her. Progressives call her a political chameleon, pointing to her moderate history, especially her prosecutorial record, as proof she's never been fully committed to progressive ideals. They see her constant pivots and unwillingness to own her past as signs of a politician who stands for whatever's most convenient at the moment. On the flip side, conservatives see her as the textbook definition of a career politician, over-rehearsed, over-managed, and completely disconnected from the average voter. To them, she's all optics, no substance. Put these narratives together, and you get a politician trapped between ambition and authenticity, with neither side believing she can inspire, lead, or connect on a real human level. It's a credibility problem that keeps growing, and one that even the best campaign slogans can't fix.
Joe Rogan's podcast is a good example of that, right? So it doesn't have to be Joe Rogan's podcast, but I think someone who's campaigning to be president of the United States should feel comfortable in their own skin and feel comfortable making a case for themselves off the cuff, without a prompter, without the need to demand editing after the conversation. Part of the reason why, this is according to Joe Rogan, you could choose to believe him or not, I think he's telling the truth. Part of the reason why Kamala Harris did not agree to an appearance on his podcast is because, well, first of all, they didn't want to do a 3-hour conversation. They wanted to do a 1-hour conversation. She didn't want to travel to Austin. She wanted him to travel to her in Washington, D.C. He doesn't do that for anyone, so he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Obviously, there were certain topics that were off limits, and then they wanted the ability to call for edits after the conversation. He doesn't edit anything. We need strong, confident candidates who can make a case for themselves, and more importantly, people who are willing to own their past record and explain why they think differently today. It's okay to say that you've changed your mind. It's totally fine. I've been there. Most people have been there. The question is, do you deny changing your mind? Do you pretend like you've always been perfect? Or do you take ownership of mistakes you've made in the past? And I think the American people actually really like and appreciate when someone is willing to own up to their mistakes. So, look, it's too late for Kamala Harris. It's too late for this election, obviously. But I think that these are teachable moments that I hope the Democratic Party takes to heart moving forward when it comes to, vetting people.
Anna Kasparian hasn't exactly been handing out praise to Kamala Harris, especially when it comes to her repeated failure to seize defining political moments. Kasparian argues that Harris's refusal to take ownership of her past, particularly her prosecutorial record, has only deepened public skepticism about her sincerity. In today's political climate, voters are far more likely to respect someone who says, I made mistakes. Here's what I've learned and how I've changed. But time and again, Harris has opted for the ultra-safe hyperscripted route, avoiding any moment that might feel raw or unpredictable. For Kasparian, this isn't just a tactical miscalculation. It's proof of a larger problem. A style of politics that belongs to a different era. A style where carefully polished talking points were enough to win hearts and minds. But in 2024, that style is dying fast, replaced by voters who demand realness over rehearsed performances. And if Harris can't adapt, moments like this will keep haunting her campaign.